Hi, I'm Dr. Stephanie Jacobs, equipping us and our relationships to keep moving forward. So come and journey with me, and along the way, stick these tools in your back pocket. In late April or early May of this year, 2023, the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, released a report entitled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on the healing effects of social connection and community. Immediately following, in the month of May, National Public Radio produced a show entitled America Has a Loneliness Epidemic. Here are 6 steps to address it. Similarly, in May, Smithsonian Magazine issued an article entitled An Epidemic of Loneliness Threatens Health of Americans, Surgeon General says. A few weeks ago, in September, the New York Times released an opinion piece entitled We Know the Cure for Loneliness, So Why Do We Suffer? And just a week later, CNN followed with an article entitled The Male Loneliness Epidemic and How It Affects Fathers. This epidemic of loneliness was even being written about during the pandemic. Harvard Magazine, for example, published a 2021 piece entitled The Loneliness Epidemic: The Psychology and Social Costs of Isolation in Everyday Life. The U.S. Surgeon General's report makes very clear the health costs of loneliness. Loneliness is linked to strokes, heart disease, dementia, inflammation, and suicide. Loneliness is as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, is more lethal than consuming 6 alcoholic drinks a day, and is even more dangerous for health than obesity. As loneliness is now considered both a global and national epidemic, it's not surprising that a shift towards solutions that build human connections is urgent. According to the New York Times, for example, Britain created the post of Minister for Loneliness in 2018 to connect millions of people with programs like songwriting workshops, community litter pickups, and nature walks. Japan also has a Minister for Loneliness, and Sweden's Minister for Social Affairs tries to aggressively address the issue there. Here in the United States, the Surgeon General suggests we strengthen our social infrastructure, enact pro-connection public policies, address medical needs stemming from loneliness, reform our relationship with technology, conduct more research on the issue, and cultivate a culture of connection. While global and national initiatives are applauded, sometimes these wide-scale solutions take a while to implement and be felt personally. To be honest, from an individual perspective, most of us intuitively know basic strategies to build human connection around shared interests like involving ourselves in volunteerism, hobbies, civic engagement, and religious or spiritual organizations. But I have to ask you, have you ever experienced being in a crowd of people, even those you love and those whom you know love you, and you still felt lonely? Perhaps our national and public conversation about loneliness is missing the point of something a bit more essential, such that we're not getting to the root of this issue. Recently, I read an article entitled The Loneliness Remedy, published in psychologytoday.com and written by a psychotherapist named Andrea Matthews in 2021 during the height of the pandemic. Her perspective really caught my interest. Now, before I read a small portion of various texts, I'd like to reference Section 107 of the Copyright Act and cite fair use for the nonprofit purposes of commentary and teaching. Andrea Matthews writes, quote, "We need to feel at home in our own bodies, in our own minds, in our own emotions, and in our own behaviors. And it is that feeling of being at one with body, mind, emotion, and behavior That feeling is the remedy for loneliness. We need a self, a strong sense of self, a self that is not defined by what others demand of us or project onto us, but is defined by what feels true to the deeper spirit, the deeper soul, the self. Once that is established, it is then, and only then, possible to find others who can relate to that self. Before we find a self, even when we are with others, they do not know us. So how can they truly relate to us? We can only truly belong to others when we first belong to ourselves. End quote. I don't know about you, but this impacts me not only as deeply clarifying, coherent, intuitive, and personal, but also deeply spiritual. And this offering immediately connected me to one of my favorite thinkers and humanitarians, Dr. Bell Hooks, who, in her book, All About Love, addresses this same sentiment in her chapter on community. She first cites Parker Palmer, and I quote, "Community cannot take root in a divided self. Long before community assumes external shape and form, it must be present as a seed in the undivided self. Only as we are in communion with ourselves can we find community with others." End quote. Bell Hooks goes on to share that, and I quote, "We all long for loving community. It enhances life's joy. But many of us seek community solely to escape the fear of being alone. Knowing how to be solitary is central to the art of loving. When we can be alone, we can be with others without using them as a means of escape." End quote. And so, with all the talk about addressing this epidemic of loneliness with strategies to help us connect with others, I can't help but wonder that what is missing from our well-intended public discourse by well-intended public servants is this crucial first step: learning how to first connect with ourselves, learning how to unite components of the self, mind, body, behavior, emotions, and spirit, so that self is undivided but whole. And from that place of a unified self, we lovingly, not selfishly, connect with others, and we know how to lovingly connect with ourselves when others are not or cannot be present. So how might we do this? I don't have a complete answer, and neither do I think a single brief podcast could adequately offer one. But what I find interesting is this. In the same chapter on community, Bell Hooks references the work of psychologist and Catholic priest Henry Nouwen, who offers a powerful reframe to perhaps start our journey. And what is this reframe? The conversion from loneliness into solitude. Bell Hooks writes, and I quote, "Nouwen contends that no friend or lover, no husband or wife, no community or commune will be able to put to rest our deepest cravings for unity and wholeness. Wisely, he suggests we put those feelings to rest by embracing our solitude, by allowing divine spirit to reveal itself there." End quote. Continuing to cite Nouwen, she goes on to write, quote, "The difficult road is the road of conversion, the conversion from loneliness into solitude. Instead of running away from our loneliness and trying to forget or deny it, we have to protect it and turn it into fruitful solitude. Loneliness is painful. Solitude is peaceful. Loneliness makes us cling to others in desperation. Solitude allows us to respect others in their uniqueness and create community." End quote. Hooks goes on to say that, and I quote, "Individuals, young and old, striving to overcome fears of being alone, often choose meditation practice as a way to embrace solitude. Learning how to sit, in stillness and quietude can be the first step toward knowing comfort in aloneness. Hooks then suggests that once we embrace solitude and learn how to first comfortably and fruitfully be with self, then we can move into community with others, which increases our capacity for fellowship. It's through fellowship that we learn to mutually serve one another, for service is a dimension of love found in community. So stick this in your back pocket. Loneliness is painful and disempowering. Solitude is peaceful and self-empowering. Comfortability with solitude prepares us to be in fellowship with others. Fellowship with others increases our capacity for mutual service. And service allows for the expression of, the giving and receiving of, communal love. And so I ask you, how can you learn to sit in stillness and quietude so that you can come to know comfort in aloneness, also known as solitude?